The gardens of Seraph's Landing smelled of jasmine at 23 degrees Celsius. I remember this specifically because I was responsible for monitoring the botanical district's environmental systems. The temperature variance was never more than 2 degrees in either direction. The humidity held steady at 62%. These were the parameters that allowed jasmine to thrive alongside the crystal fountains and meditation groves where citizens gathered during rest periods. I was 37 standard years old. I had lived on Seraph's Landing my entire life. My father had maintained the water reclamation systems. My brother worked in the agricultural zones. We were one family among 8 billion, living in conditions most imperial worlds could not imagine. Seraph's Landing was classified as a paradise world, one of perhaps 300 across the Imperium. We produced nothing of military value. Our tithes consisted of luxury goods, botanical specimens, and genetic samples from our unusually stable biosphere. The administratum had designated us non-strategic. We had no manufactorums, no fortress monasteries, no orbital defense platforms of significance. A single PDF regiment maintained civil order, though there had been no civil disturbance in 3 generations. 2 system defense monitors orbited at standard intervals. Their crews rotated every 5 years and complained about the assignment's monotony. We were boring, safe, beautiful. I worked in Environmental Monitoring Station 7 on the eastern continent's coast. My shift began each morning at the 6th hour. I would walk from my residential block through gardens filled with flowering trees imported from a dozen worlds. Birds sang. Citizens greeted each other with casual familiarity. Children played in parks maintained by automated systems that required only light supervision. The architecture was elegant, white stone and transparent aluminum, designed to blend with the landscape rather than dominate it. From my station's observation deck, I could see the ocean, blue-green water extending to the horizon. Clean, unpolluted, the kind of ocean that existed in historical records but rarely in reality. My supervisor was named Cornelius. He was 63 years old, gray-haired, soft-spoken. He had worked in environmental monitoring for 40 years. He knew the systems intimately, could diagnose problems by subtle shifts in data readouts that I would not have noticed. He taught me to read the patterns, to understand that environmental systems were not static. They breathed, fluctuated, responded to pressures both internal and external. A good monitor learned to feel the rhythms, to know when something was wrong before the alarms triggered. On the morning of the 7th day of the 3rd month, Cornelius noticed something. A fluctuation in atmospheric composition, negligible, 0.003% increase in particulate matter. Within acceptable variance technically, but unusual. Seraph's Landing's atmosphere was remarkably stable. Fluctuations that small typically required specific causes. Industrial output changes, volcanic activity, mass agricultural burning. None of those causes were present. Cornelius logged the anomaly and flagged it for review. He told me it was probably nothing, sensor drift, calibration error, but we would monitor it. That was the job. The fluctuation increased over the following 3 days, still within acceptable parameters, but trending upward. Cornelius contacted other monitoring stations. They confirmed similar readings. Particulate matter increasing, atmospheric composition shifting. Chemical analysis indicated the particulates were organic, biological material, possibly pollen from an unidentified plant species, possibly spores. The origin remained unclear. Cornelius recommended alerting the Planetary Governor's Environmental Council. The recommendation was logged. A review was scheduled for the following week. On the 11th day, the first deaths occurred. 3 citizens in the northern continent's primary city. They had developed respiratory symptoms, coughing, fever, fluid accumulation in the lungs. Medical staff treated them with standard antibiotics and respiratory support. The patients did not respond. Their conditions deteriorated rapidly. Within 16 hours of symptom onset, all 3 died. Autopsies revealed extensive tissue damage. Lung tissue had necrotized, cellular breakdown at a rate inconsistent with any known pathogen. The medical examiner flagged the deaths as anomalous. Samples were sent to the Planetary Medical Authority for analysis. 7 more deaths occurred over the next 2 days. Same symptoms, same rapid progression, same tissue necrosis. The medical authority issued a health alert. Citizens experiencing respiratory symptoms were instructed to report to medical facilities immediately. Quarantine protocols were activated for confirmed cases. The pathogen was classified as unknown. Transmission vector uncertain. The alert generated concern, but not panic. Seraph's Landing had sophisticated medical infrastructure. Plagues were historical curiosities. We would identify the pathogen, develop treatment protocols, and contain the outbreak. That was the assumption. Cornelius and I continued monitoring atmospheric data. The particulate levels were now significantly elevated, 0.017% above baseline. Chemical analysis showed the particulates contained complex organic compounds, proteins, nucleic acids, structures that resembled spores but did not match any known biological database. Cornelius was concerned. He said the atmospheric changes and the deaths were likely connected. The particulates were the pathogen. Airborne transmission. That meant the entire planet was exposed. He recommended immediate planetary quarantine. His recommendation was forwarded to the governor's staff. A response was pending. On the 15th day, the plants began changing. Subtle changes initially. Color shifts in certain flowering species. The jasmine in the botanical district developed red streaks through the petals. The crystal fountains surrounding gardens showed similar discoloration, blue and purple flowers fading to dark crimson. I logged the observations, assumed it was environmental stress, perhaps related to the atmospheric particulate increase. Cornelius examined the affected plants directly. He said they were not dying. They were transforming. The cellular structure was changing, mutating. He collected samples and sent them to the Biological Research Institute. The Research Institute's response took 3 days. Their analysis was disturbing. The plant samples showed genetic alteration at the molecular level. DNA sequences had been rewritten. New genetic information had been inserted. The source of the insertion was unknown. The mechanism was unknown. The result was clear. The plants were no longer the species they had been. They were something new, something that should not exist. The Institute recommended immediate eradication of all affected plant life. Cornelius forwarded the recommendation. No response came. By the 20th day, the transformation was visible across the entire continent. Gardens that had been filled with carefully cultivated species now contained plants no one recognized. The jasmine had grown, not gradually, explosively. Vines that had been decorative ground cover now climbed buildings, wrapped around structural supports. The flowers had changed. No longer delicate white blossoms. Now they were bulbous, dark red. They pulsed, rhythmically, like breathing. The scent had changed, too. No longer jasmine. Something else. Sweet, but wrong. Like rotting fruit mixed with incense. Citizens began reporting strange behavior in local fauna. Birds attacking without provocation. Small mammals developing growths. Tumorous masses protruding from their bodies. The Planetary Animal Control Authority received hundreds of reports. Teams were dispatched to investigate. What they found contradicted all biological precedent. Animals were mutating, spontaneously, developing additional limbs, extra eyes, structures that served no evolutionary purpose, bone spurs erupting through skin, teeth growing in random patterns. The mutations were incompatible with life, yet the animals continued functioning, continued moving, continued hunting. I watched a bird land on the observation deck's railing during my shift on the 22nd day. It had been a common sparrow, blue-gray plumage, small, harmless. But now it was larger, twice its normal size. Its feathers had darkened to black. Its eyes were wrong. Too many of them, 7 eyes clustered across its head. The beak had split, become serrated, like teeth. The bird watched me, all 7 eyes focused simultaneously. Then it flew away. I reported the observation. Cornelius said similar reports were coming from across the planet. The transformation was not isolated. It was systemic. Seraph's Landing's entire biosphere was changing. The governor finally issued a planetary emergency declaration on the 24th day. Citizens were instructed to remain indoors, avoid contact with plant and animal life. Water supplies were to be boiled before consumption. The PDF was mobilized to enforce quarantine zones around the most severely affected areas. A request for Imperial assistance was transmitted via astropathic relay. Response time was estimated at minimum 4 weeks. We were to contain the situation until support arrived. Containment was impossible. The transformation accelerated. The jasmine vines grew 6 meters overnight. They broke through windows, invaded buildings. The flowers opened. Inside were not seeds. Inside were mouths, small, lined with teeth. They bit. Citizens who attempted to cut the vines reported injuries, lacerations, puncture wounds. Some reported the vines moved deliberately, reached for them, wrapped around limbs and constricted. 3 citizens were found dead in their homes, strangled by jasmine vines that had grown through their ventilation systems. Cornelius stopped coming to the monitoring station after the 26th day. He sent a message saying his residential block was under siege. The gardens surrounding the building had become hostile. Plants that had been decorative were now predatory. They grabbed, they consumed. He and other residents had barricaded themselves on the upper floors. They were awaiting PDF extraction. I acknowledged his message and continued monitoring. The data had become irrelevant. The atmospheric composition was now 12% deviant from baseline. The particulates were no longer particulates. They were spores, billions of them, saturating the air, rewriting everything they touched. I met Matthias on the 28th day. He arrived at the monitoring station with a PDF patrol. They were conducting evacuations of isolated facilities, consolidating personnel in defensible locations. The city centers were being fortified. The PDF was establishing perimeter zones. Everything outside the perimeters was being abandoned. Matthias was a lieutenant, 29 years old. He had dark hair and a scar above his left eye from a training accident. He told me I needed to gather essentials and prepare for immediate evacuation. I asked about Cornelius. He checked his data slate, shook his head. The residential block had been overrun before extraction teams arrived. No survivors recovered. I gathered nothing. There was nothing to gather. Matthias escorted me to a transport. 8 other civilians were already aboard. They were silent, staring at nothing. Shell-shocked, we had lived in paradise. Paradise was eating us. The transport lifted off and flew toward the designated safe zone. Through the window, I watched the landscape passing below. Gardens that had been beautiful were now nightmarish. The plants had grown wild, chaotic. They covered everything. Buildings were barely visible beneath the vegetation. The colors were wrong. Reds and purples and blacks. Nothing natural, nothing that belonged. The safe zone was the planetary capital's central administrative district. High walls, reinforced gates, PDF soldiers at every checkpoint. Inside, perhaps 200,000 citizens had been evacuated. They filled the streets, the public buildings, the parks. There were not enough supplies, not enough information. Fear was visible. People asked questions no one could answer. What was happening? Why were the plants changing? When would Imperial help arrive? The answers were unknown, unknown, and uncertain. Matthias was assigned to perimeter defense. I volunteered to assist with logistics, inventory management, distribution coordination, anything to stay useful, to avoid thinking about what was happening outside the walls. They gave me a data slate and a station in the supply depot. I logged incoming resources, logged distributions. The numbers were not sustainable. We had food for approximately 3 weeks at current population levels, water for 2 months if rationing was enforced, medical supplies for perhaps 10 days at current usage rates. We needed relief. Soon. The perimeter came under attack on the 31st day, not from human hostiles, from the plants. The vines had reached the walls. They climbed, faster than plants should move. The PDF soldiers fired lasguns at them. The last bolts burned through the vegetation, but there was too much. For every vine destroyed, 3 more took its place. The flowers opened. The mouths inside bit at soldiers who got too close. One soldier fell from the wall. The vines caught him, pulled him down. He screamed for 17 seconds, then stopped. The vines dragged his body into the mass. What happened after, I did not see. Flamer teams were deployed. Promethium poured across the vines. The flames worked. The vegetation burned, but the smoke was toxic, black and acrid. Citizens near the walls developed respiratory symptoms. The same symptoms from the initial outbreak. The medical staff could do nothing. The patients died within hours. Tissue necrosis, rapid cellular breakdown. The pathogen was in the smoke. Burning the plants just dispersed the spores. The flamer teams ceased operations. Alternative methods were required. Matthias returned from perimeter duty during the 33rd day. He looked exhausted. His uniform was stained with ash and plant matter. He told me the situation was deteriorating. The walls would not hold much longer. The PDF command was discussing retreat to secondary positions. Smaller perimeters, more defensible. But that meant abandoning portions of the safe zone, abandoning citizens who could not be evacuated in time. He said the decisions were being made above his authority. He was just following orders. I asked him if he believed the Emperor would protect us. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said the Emperor protected those who protected themselves. Faith without action was just waiting to die. We needed to act, to survive. The Emperor would judge us by our efforts, not our prayers. I appreciated his honesty. Most would have offered platitudes. He offered reality. The first possessions occurred on the 35th day. A citizen in the eastern sector began exhibiting erratic behavior, speaking in languages no one recognized, claiming to hear voices, promising, offering. The man attacked a medical orderly, tore out the orderly's throat with his teeth. PDF soldiers subdued the attacker, restrained him. He laughed while they bound him, said they were all going to change, going to become beautiful, going to transcend their weak flesh. The soldiers executed him. Bolt pistol to the skull. The body was burned immediately. 3 more possessions occurred over the next 2 days. Same pattern. Erratic behavior, violence, claims of transformation. Each time the possessed were executed and cremated. But the rate was increasing. The medical authority issued a directive. Any citizen exhibiting signs of possession was to be reported immediately, quarantined, evaluated, if confirmed, terminated. There was no room for mercy, no capacity for restraint. The alternative was contamination spreading through the entire population. Matthias told me during the 37th day that he had shot a child, a boy, perhaps 10 years old. The child had been found in the medical district. His eyes had changed, no longer human eyes, compound eyes, like an insect. The child had been speaking in that unknown language, had lunged at Matthias when approached. Matthias fired. 1 shot, center mass. The child died instantly. Matthias said this matter-of-factly, no emotion. Just report. He had executed a possessed child because protocol required it. He asked if that made him damned. I told him damnation required choice. He had no choice. He nodded. Said that was what he told himself. I am uncertain if he believed it. The walls failed on the 40th day. The vines had grown too large, too numerous. They broke through in the southern sector, poured into the streets. Citizens fled. The PDF attempted to establish fallback positions, to contain the breach. They failed. The vines moved with purpose. They targeted specific buildings, specific people. This was not random growth. This was directed, intelligent. Something was controlling the transformation, using it as a weapon. Matthias and I retreated with a group of approximately 60 civilians and 12 PDF soldiers. We moved through the administrative district's underground maintenance tunnels. The vines had not reached there yet. We established a temporary position in a water treatment facility, sealed the access points, posted guards, waited. Above us we could hear sounds, screaming, last gun fire, explosions. The battle for the capital was ending. We were losing. During the 42nd day, one of the soldiers reported something in the water, shapes, moving. He had seen them in the treatment pools, dark shapes, larger than any fish. The facility manager checked the systems, said that was impossible. The pools were filtered, monitored. Nothing should be in there. We went to look. The pool was dark, murky. The water had changed color, no longer clear. Now it was reddish, like diluted blood. As we watched, something surfaced. Not a fish, a mass, flesh and vegetation combined, pulsing, growing. The manager said we needed to leave immediately. The water supply was compromised. If we drank it, we would become like the others, transformed, possessed. We abandoned the facility, moved deeper into the tunnel system, found an equipment storage area, barricaded it, took inventory. We had minimal supplies, 3 days of food, perhaps 5 days of water if rationed strictly. Ammunition for the soldiers was limited. Each had approximately 40 rounds remaining. No resupply available, no communication with PDF command. We were isolated, alone, surrounded by a planet that had become hostile. Matthias said we had 2 options: wait for rescue or attempt to reach the starport. The starport was 17 kilometers away, through streets now overrun with transformed vegetation and possessed citizens. The attempt would likely be suicidal, but waiting guaranteed death by starvation, or worse, transformation. The group voted. 43 chose to wait. 17 chose to attempt the starport. Matthias chose the starport. He said waiting was just dying slowly. He preferred to die trying. I chose to go with him, not because I believed we would succeed, but because dying with purpose was preferable to dying while hiding. Matthias nodded when I told him this. He said that was the only sane response to an insane situation. We left during the 44th day. 17 of us, Matthias, and 11 other PDF soldiers, 5 civilians including myself. We moved through the tunnels as far as possible, emerged 3 kilometers from our starting point. The surface was unrecognizable. The streets were buried under vegetation. Buildings were collapsing under the weight. The vines had grown through structural supports, weakened foundations. Architecture that had stood for centuries was crumbling in weeks. The air smelled wrong, sweet and rotten simultaneously. The spores were visible now, drifting through the air like snow, except warm. 41 degrees Celsius. The temperature had increased. Seraph's Landing's perfect climate was breaking down. We encountered the first possessed 300 meters from the tunnel exit. A group of them, 12 individuals. They had been citizens. Now they were something else. Their bodies had changed. Skin darkened, textured, like bark, grouts protruding from joints, bone spurs, additional limbs. Some had extra arms, malformed, functionless, just grotesque extensions of flesh and bone. Their faces were still recognizable. I saw a man I had known, a neighbor from my residential block. His name had been Thomas. He worked in waste reclamation. Now he stared at us with eyes that had split, become multiple pupils in a single socket. He smiled. His teeth had become sharp. He said we should join them, said transformation was liberation, said the gods were kind. They would remake us into something better. The PDF soldiers opened fire. Last bolts struck the possessed, burned through corrupted flesh. They fell, but they continued moving, crawling, reaching for us. It took multiple shots to stop each one. Headshots were most effective, but even then the bodies twitched, spasmed, like the consciousness had not fully departed. We moved past the corpses quickly. Matthias said nothing. His expression was controlled, But I saw something in his eyes. Recognition. Understanding. That could have been us. Could still be us. The line between human and possessed was paper thin. Arbitrary. We were surviving by chance. Nothing more. We fought 12 more engagements over the next 7 kilometers. Groups of possessed, sometimes small, sometimes dozens. Each time our ammunition depleted. Each time we lost people. A soldier fell when a possessed grabbed his leg, pulled him down, bit through his throat. We shot them both. Another civilian was impaled by a bone spur when we were ambushed in a collapsed building. The spur went through his chest. He died in approximately 90 seconds. We left his body. No time for rites, no time for grief. We moved. By the 51st day, our group was reduced to 7. Matthias and 4 soldiers, myself and 1 other civilian, a man named Joran. He had been a botanical researcher, specialized in gene modification techniques. He said what was happening to Seraph's Landing was not random mutation. It was engineered, deliberate. The spores were rewriting genetic code according to specific templates. Templates designed by something with profound understanding of biological systems. He said this was beyond human capability, beyond anything the Imperium could produce. This was Xeno's technology. Or worse, chaos corruption. He said that word quietly. Chaos. The soldiers glanced at him, did not respond. We all knew, we had known for weeks. But speaking it made it real, made it undeniable. We reached the starport's outer perimeter on the 54th day. The starport was still defended. PDF soldiers held barricades around the primary landing fields. 2 transport ships were visible, gun cutters, capable of orbital flight. They were loading evacuees, hundreds of people queuing for boarding. Behind them, the starport's defense was crumbling. The vines had reached the western edge. Flamer teams were burning them back. But the vegetation grew faster than it could be destroyed. Matthias approached the perimeter checkpoint, identified himself, requested entry. The checkpoint guard reviewed his credentials, nodded, allowed us through. We joined the queue, waited. The line moved slowly, too slowly. I watched the western perimeter. The vines were advancing. The flamer teams were retreating, falling back to secondary positions. We had perhaps 2 hours before the starport was overrun. The first gun cutter launched during our wait. Its engines roared, lifted off, climbed toward orbit. I watched it go, felt something that might have been hope or envy. Those people were escaping. We were still here, still waiting, still vulnerable. The second gun cutter began boarding. We were perhaps 200 people from the front of the line. Then the western perimeter collapsed. The vines broke through, poured across the landing field. The PDF soldiers opened fire. Massive coordinated volleys. ZAS fire saturated the vegetation, burned, destroyed, but not enough. Not fast enough. The vines reached the queue. People panicked, scattered, ran. Some ran toward the gun cutter. Some ran back toward the starport buildings. Some simply froze. Matthias grabbed my arm, pulled me toward the gun cutter. We ran. The other survivors followed. The vines were behind us, reaching, grasping. A soldier fell. The vines wrapped around his legs, pulled him back. He screamed, fired his last gun into the mass. The vines dragged him under. His screaming stopped. We kept running. We reached the gun cutter's boarding ramp. 50 other people were trying to board simultaneously. Crush of bodies. Shoving. Desperation. The ramp was collapsing under the weight. The pilot was screaming to clear space, to organize. No one listened. Matthias forced his way through, dragged me with him. We made it aboard. The other civilian, Joran, was behind us. He reached the ramp. Then something grabbed him, a vine, wrapped around his waist. Pulled, he fell, rolled off the ramp, landed in the vegetation below. I saw his face, saw him realize what was happening, saw him reach toward us. Then the vines covered him. He was gone. The ramp closed. The gun cutter launched. Engines ignited. The acceleration pressed me against the bulkhead. Through the viewport, I watched Seraph's Landing fall away, watched the capital burning, watched the vegetation spreading like infection across the continent, watched paradise die. The gun cutter climbed through Seraph's Landing's atmosphere. I watched through the viewport as the planet shrank. From orbit, the transformation was visible across the entire hemisphere. The green and blue world I had known was now mottled with dark red and purple, like bruising spreading across flesh. Continents that had been covered in carefully maintained ecosystems were now masses of chaotic growth. The cities were barely visible beneath the vegetation. From this distance, the horror was abstract, beautiful almost. A planet being consumed, rewritten, transformed into something that defied classification. Matthias sat beside me in the transport hold. His face was blank. Processing. We had escaped. Survived when billions had not. The guilt was not immediate. It would come later. For now, there was only exhaustion. Only the recognition that we were alive and everything we had known was dead or dying. The gun cutter docked with a Navy frigate in high orbit. The vessel was designated Emperor's Vigilance. Old. Battle-scarred. It had been stationed in-system as part of routine patrol rotation. When Seraph's Landing's distress beacon activated, the frigate had moved to orbital position. They had been evacuating survivors for the past week. We were among the last. The captain made this clear during processing. The planet was lost. No further rescue operations would be attempted. We were fortunate. We had survived. We should thank the Emperor for his mercy. I felt no gratitude, only numbness. The processing staff logged our identities, provided basic supplies, directed us to refugee quarters in the lower decks. The quarters were crowded. Perhaps 300 people packed into spaces designed for 80. The air was stale, recycled too many times. The temperature was 32 degrees, uncomfortable but survivable. I found a section of floor, sat, waited. For what? I did not know. Matthias found me 6 hours later. He said he had been speaking with other PDF survivors, learning what had happened across the rest of the planet. The story was identical everywhere. Atmospheric contamination, plant mutation, animal transformation, possession, collapse. The timeline varied by region, but the outcome was universal. Seraph's Landing had fallen in 58 days, from first atmospheric anomaly to planetary loss. Less than 2 months. He said that was impossible. Chaos corruption typically took years to fully manifest. What happened on Seraph's Landing was accelerated, concentrated, deliberate. Someone had orchestrated this, used the planet as a testing ground, or a sacrifice, or both. I asked how many had escaped. He said the Navy estimated 214 million evacuees from a population of 8 billion, approximately 2.6% survival rate, 97.4% casualties. The scale was incomprehensible. I had never seen casualty statistics that large outside of historical records. Matthias said the Navy was still receiving distress signals from across the planet. Isolated survivor groups, bunkers, underground facilities. But the frigate could not reach them. The planet's surface was too hostile. The corruption had spread to the orbital approach vectors. Ships attempting atmospheric entry were being attacked, not by conventional weapons, by the planet itself. The atmosphere had become corrosive. Ships reported hull breaches, system failures, biological contamination in ventilation systems. Seraph's Landing was rejecting Imperial presence, defending itself, or something was defending it. The Astra Militarum Response Fleet arrived on the 73rd day. 4 troop transports, 2 escort frigates, 1 cruiser. They brought the 88th Cadian Regiment, 10,000 guardsmen, heavy armor support, orbital bombardment capability. The fleet commander transmitted to all vessels in system. An expeditionary force would deploy to the surface. Objective: assess corruption extent. Establish beachhead if possible. Reclaim the planet if feasible. The transmission was formal, professional, It revealed no awareness that the objective was already impossible. I watched the deployment from the refugee deck's observation port. The troop transports moved into low orbit, launched drop pods, hundreds of them, streaking through the atmosphere like meteors. From this distance, they were beautiful, points of light descending toward the surface. I wondered how many would reach the ground intact, how many would survive the first hour, the first day. The operation lasted 6 days. The reports came through in fragments, transmitted by Vox when atmospheric interference permitted. The regiment established a landing zone in what had been the northern continent's industrial sector, encountered immediate hostile contact, not from human forces, from the environment itself. The plants attacked, coordinated attacks, as if controlled by singular intelligence. Vines wrapped around vehicles, disabled engines, pulled soldiers from formation. Flowers released toxic spores. Guardsmen developed respiratory failure, died within minutes. The animals attacked in waves, mutated creatures that should not have been capable of coordinated behavior. They flanked, they ambushed, they used tactics. The possessed humans were worse. They did not fight like cultists. They fought like something wearing human bodies. They used weapons they should not have been able to operate, displayed strength beyond human capability. A single possessed could kill 3 guardsmen before being brought down. And when they died, the bodies erupted, released spores, spread contamination. Every kill created more infection vectors. The regiment's casualty rate exceeded acceptable thresholds within 36 hours. On the 4th day, the regiment reported contact with entities they could not classify. Not human, not animal, not plant. Something that combined all 3. Massive, organic structures that walked, that had eyes and mouths in places eyes and mouths should not exist. The Vox transmission included screaming, lasgun fire, something roaring, then static. The transmission did not resume. The fleet commander ordered evacuation on the 6th day. The regiment had suffered 73% casualties, 6 days of operations, 7,300 dead. The survivors were extracted under heavy fire. The dropships that retrieved them reported extensive biological contamination. Several ships suffered hull breaches. One crashed during ascent. All hands lost. The operation was classified as catastrophic failure. The planet could not be reclaimed by conventional means. Alternative measures were required. Matthias told me what that meant. He had served long enough to understand imperial doctrine. When a world fell to chaos corruption beyond recovery, there was only one response: exterminatus, total planetary annihilation. The Imperium would not allow a chaos-corrupted world to exist. The risk was too great. Corruption spread, infected nearby systems, created warp rifrations. Better to destroy the world entirely than allow the taint to metastasize. The order came through on the 81st day, transmitted directly from Segmentum Command. Seraph's Landing was declared perdita, lost to the Imperium. All personnel were to evacuate to minimum safe distance. Exterminators' protocols authorized. The cruiser would execute the order. Cyclonic torpedoes, atmospheric ignition, total sterilization. The planet would burn. Everything on it would die. The refugees would watch. I did not want to watch, but the observation deck was crowded with survivors. Hundreds of us. We had lived there. We needed to see it end. Needed to witness the final death of everything we had known. Matthias stood beside me. His expression was controlled, but his hands were shaking, subtle tremor. He noticed me noticing, said he was cold. The observation deck's temperature regulation was inadequate. I did not correct him. The deck was 32 degrees. He was not cold. He was processing trauma the only way he could. Through lies that maintained function, the cruiser moved into bombardment position. High orbit, clear trajectory. The targeting solutions were calculated. Verified, the captain transmitted final warning to any survivors on the surface. All Imperial personnel were to seek deep shelter. Mark locations with emergency beacons. Recovery would be attempted post-sterilization. The transmission was procedure. No one believed survivors existed. And if they did, deep shelter would not save them. Cyclonic torpedoes cracked tectonic plates, ignited atmospheres. Nothing survived. The first torpedo launched at the 81st day's 14th hour. I watched it descend, a single point of light, falling toward the planet's northern hemisphere. It struck. The viewport's auto-dimming activated instantly. Protected us from the flash, even dimmed, the light was intense, white-blue, expanding. The explosion was visible from orbit, a sphere of fire growing. Consuming, the shockwave radiated outward. Atmosphere ignited. The ignition spread. Hemispheric firestorm within minutes. The temperature at ground level would exceed 6,000 degrees Celsius. Nothing organic could survive. Nothing inorganic would remain intact. The second torpedo struck the southern hemisphere. Same result. Fire, expansion, consumption. The two firestorms met at the equator, merged, covered the entire planet. From orbit, Seraph's landing was now a sphere of flame. The atmosphere burned, the oceans boiled, the continents shattered. I watched the planet die, watched 8 billion people reduced to ash and vapor, watched paradise consumed by fire. The process took 4 hours. When it ended, Seraph's landing no longer existed as a habitable world. The atmosphere was gone. The surface was molten slag. The tectonic structure was compromised. The planet would collapse into geological instability. In 1,000 years, it might cool enough for bacterial life. In 10,000, it might develop primitive ecosystems. But it would never be paradise again. That was gone. Permanently. Matthias was crying, silently. Tears running down his face. He did not wipe them away, did not acknowledge them. His eyes were fixed on the viewport. On the burning planet, he had executed a possessed child to prevent corruption, had fought through 54 days of horror to survive, had watched his world die twice, once to corruption, once to fire. I understood his tears, but I had none. My capacity for grief had been exhausted. I felt only emptiness, recognition that something irreplaceable had been destroyed, that I had been part of it. That I carried its memory. That was all that remained. The fleet departed the system on the 83rd day. Destination, nearest naval station for refugee processing. Transit time, 6 weeks. The refugee quarters remained crowded. Supplies were adequate but minimal. The Navy provided rations and water. Basic medical care. Nothing more. We were cargo. Survivors to be delivered and processed. Our trauma was irrelevant to the ship's function. We existed in the lower decks, out of sight, out of mind. I spent the transit in isolation, not physical isolation. Psychological isolation. I was surrounded by hundreds of refugees, but I could not connect with them, could not process their presence as real. They were ghosts, echoes of a world that no longer existed. We shared nothing except loss. That was insufficient foundation for connection. Matthias tried to maintain contact, would sit with me during ration distribution, would talk about nothing important, plans for after processing, where we might be assigned, what we might do. I appreciated his effort, but I could not reciprocate. My capacity for future-oriented thinking had degraded. I could only process past and present. Future was abstract, uncertain, possibly non-existent. During the 3rd week of transit, refugees began developing symptoms: respiratory distress, fever, skin discoloration. The ship's medical staff examined the affected individuals, quarantined them. 14 people showed symptoms. All had been evacuated from the same region, the southern continent's coastal districts. The medical staff concluded they had been exposed to spores before evacuation. The infection had been dormant. Now it was activating. The affected refugees were confined to an isolated section, monitored. The medical staff said treatment options were limited. They would provide supportive care. But if the infection progressed to possession, termination would be necessary. They said this directly to the quarantined refugees. No euphemism, no false hope. You are infected. If you transform, you will be executed. Prepare accordingly. Matthias volunteered for quarantine watch, guard duty outside the isolation section. He said someone needed to ensure the infected did not escape if they transformed. Better him than someone who did not understand what they were facing. I asked if he was not exhausted, if he wanted rest instead. He said rest was not possible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Seraph's Landing, saw the plants, the possessed, the burning. Working gave him purpose, purpose prevented thinking. Thinking prevented sleep. Sleep invited dreams. Dreams were worse than exhaustion. I understood. I had not slept properly since the 35th day. The first transformation occurred during the 4th week. One of the quarantined refugees, a man named Petron. He had been a civil engineer, 41 years old. He had evacuated with his son. The son was in general quarters, not infected. Petran began screaming during the night cycle. The guards reported his voice changed, became multiple voices, speaking simultaneously. He tore at his skin, ripped open his own flesh. Something was growing inside him, pushing outward, bone and tissue reconfiguring. The medical staff attempted sedation. The sedatives did not work. Petran's body continued transforming. His spine erupted through his back, extended like additional limbs, his jaw dislocated, mouth widened, teeth multiplied. He stopped being human. Became something else, something that looked at the guards with intelligence that was not Petron's intelligence. Matthias was on duty. He executed the transformed refugee. Bolt pistol. 3 shots to center mass. The body collapsed. Stopped moving. The medical staff incinerated the remains immediately. Matthias filed an incident report. Noted that possession had occurred despite quarantine. Recommended enhanced monitoring of remaining infected refugees. His recommendations were implemented. The remaining 13 were restrained. Observed continuously. No privacy, no dignity. Just containment until they either recovered or transformed. 4 more transformed over the following week. Same pattern. Screaming. Physical mutation. Loss of human characteristics. Each time, Matthias was on duty. Each time he executed them. He stopped speaking after the 3rd execution. Would sit in the corridor outside the isolation section. Staring at the wall, I brought him rations during the 5th week. He did not eat. Said he was not hungry. I told him he needed to maintain strength. He said strength was irrelevant. He was just following procedure. Executing possessed refugees. That was his function. He would continue functioning until the function was no longer required. Then he would stop. I asked what he meant by stop. He did not answer. The ship arrived at Naval Station Secundus during the 6th week. The station was a massive orbital facility, capable of processing millions of refugees annually. We were not the first survivors the station had received. Would not be the last. The Imperium lost worlds constantly. Chaos incursions, orc invasions, tyrannid consumption, refugees were standard byproduct of Imperial warfare. The station had protocols. We would be processed, evaluated, assigned to new worlds, given new identities, new functions. Our previous lives were irrelevant. We were raw material now, resources to be allocated according to Imperial need. Processing took 3 weeks. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, skill assessments. They logged everything. Name, age, occupation, competencies, psychological stability rating. I was classified as stable with moderate trauma markers, suitable for reassignment to administrative functions. I would be shipped to an agri-world in the Ultima Segmentum, work in resource management. My knowledge of environmental systems was transferable. I would be useful. That was all that mattered. Matthias was classified as unstable. High trauma markers, evidence of dissociative behavior, unsuitable for continued military service. He would be assigned to labor duties. Manual work, minimal decision-making required. Supervised environment. He did not contest the classification, said it was accurate. He was broken. Knew it, accepted it. I asked where he would be assigned. He said, A forge world. Metallica IN. Labor crews maintaining industrial systems. Dangerous work. High casualty rate. But demand for laborers exceeded supply. They would take anyone functional enough to work. He would work until he died. That was his future. He said this without emotion, just fact. I had no response. What could I say? He was correct. We separated during the final processing stage. Different assignments, different transports, different futures. He stood before me in the departure queue, extended his hand. I took it. His grip was weak, exhausted. He said he was grateful to have known me, that surviving together meant something, that he would remember Seraph's Landing, remember what we had lost, remember what we had been. I told him I would remember too. He nodded, released my hand, walked toward his transport. I watched him go, watched him disappear into the crowd of refugees being processed. I never saw him again. I learned what happened to him 2 years later. A data report crossed my desk during routine administrative work. Casualty lists from Metallica IX. Labor accidents. His name was on the list. Deceased. Industrial machinery malfunction. Death logged as instantaneous. Body recovered and processed according to protocol. He had survived Seraph's Landing, survived the evacuation, survived the processing, then died in an industrial accident 18 months after arrival. The report noted his psychological evaluation had indicated high risk for workplace incidents. That assessment had been accurate. He had been broken, continued functioning as long as required, then stopped, just as he had said he would. I have lived for 9 years since Seraph's Landing's fall. I work on an agri-world designated Thrones Harvest. Population 3 million. The world produces grain for imperial tithes. I manage resource distribution in the southern continent's agricultural zone. The work is adequate. Not fulfilling, but adequate. I function. That is what I do. Function. The other refugees dispersed across the Imperium. 214 million survivors assigned to hundreds of worlds. Some thrived, found new lives, new purposes. Most did not. The trauma of watching a paradise world fall to chaos is not something one recovers from. The psychological evaluations were accurate. We were damaged. Many developed long-term disorders, depression, anxiety, dissociative episodes. Suicide rates among Seraph's Landing refugees exceeded baseline by 417% during the first 5 years. The administratum logged the data, noted the pattern, implemented no changes. High trauma populations had poor outcomes. This was expected, acceptable. The Imperium had processed us, given us new assignments. What we did with those assignments was our responsibility. I think about Cornelius sometimes, about his face when he noticed the first atmospheric anomaly, the concern, the professional curiosity. He knew something was wrong, tried to alert the authorities, was ignored, then died when his residential block was overrun. He had been 63 years old, had worked in environmental monitoring for 40 years, had trained me, had treated me with patience and respect. He deserved better than being strangled by mutated jasmine vines in his own home. But the universe does not distribute deserving, only outcomes. His outcome was death. Mine was survival. Neither was deserved. Both occurred. I think about the gardens, about walking through them during my morning commute, the jasmine at 23 degrees Celsius, the crystal fountains, the birds singing, citizens greeting each other, children playing. It had been real, had existed. 8 billion people living in conditions most of the Imperium could not imagine. Safety, beauty, peace. We had believed these were permanent, had assumed paradise was stable, had not understood that beauty was temporary, that horror was always waiting, that the moment chaos noticed us, we were already lost. Seraph's Landing fell in 58 days. The Astra Militarum's response arrived on day 73, 15 days too late. Even if they had arrived immediately, they would have failed. The corruption was too advanced, too widespread, too engineered. Something had targeted Seraph's Landing deliberately, had infected it with precision, had transformed it into a daemon world in less than 2 months. The Imperium's response was exterminatus, total annihilation. 8 billion souls reduced to ash because recovery was impossible, because allowing the corruption to spread was worse than destroying the world. I understand the logic, understand the necessity, but understanding does not eliminate grief, does not erase memory. I carry Seraph's Landing with me, carry the gardens and the fountains and the jasmine, carry Cornelius and Thomas and Joran and Matthias, carry the moment I watched my world burn from orbit, carry the recognition that paradise was an illusion, that safety was temporary, that the Imperium's grip on its territories is tenuous, that chaos is always probing, always seeking weakness, always ready to corrupt and consume. I am one survivor among 214 million. My testimony is not unique. 214 million people watched their world fall, watched it burn, carry the same memories, the same trauma, the same recognition. We are scattered across the Imperium now, anonymous, functionless except for our assigned duties. The Administratum logs us as refugees, former residents of Seraph's Landing, designation perdita. We exist in ledgers and databases, statistics in casualty reports. We are not individuals, we are data points, evidence of chaos's reach, evidence of the Imperium's response, evidence that paradise is temporary and horror is permanent. Throne's harvest is not beautiful. The landscape is flat, agricultural fields extending to the horizon. The temperature varies between 12 and 38 degrees Celsius depending on season. The air smells of fertilizer and grain dust. The citizens work hard, live simple lives. There is no jasmine here, no crystal fountains, no gardens filled with flowering trees. But there is also no corruption, no possession, no plants that eat people, no animals that hunt with intelligence they should not possess. The world is stable, safe, boring. I am grateful for boring, grateful for safety, grateful to be alive, even if being alive means carrying memories I cannot forget. I have not spoken about Seraph's Landing in 7 years. What would I say? That I watched paradise become hell? That I survived when billions did not? That I carry guilt for surviving despite doing nothing to earn survival? These statements are true but meaningless. Everyone in the Imperium carries trauma, carries loss, carries guilt. My trauma is not special. My loss is not unique. The Imperium processes billions into suffering annually. I am simply one more component, one more survivor, one more functionary doing assigned duties while carrying memories of something better that no longer exists. But I document this now because documentation is necessary, because someone should record what happened, should testify to how quickly paradise fell, should note that chaos corruption can transform a world in less than 2 months, that 8 billion souls can be lost in a single campaign, that the Imperium's response to such loss is fire and ash, that survivors are processed and discarded, that memory is all that remains. Seraph's Landing was a paradise world, one of 300 across the Imperium, beautiful, safe, wealthy. We believed we were protected, believed the Emperor's light shielded us, believed our lack of strategic value made us irrelevant to the galaxy's conflicts. We were wrong. Chaos does not distinguish between strategic and non-strategic. It consumes what it can reach. It reached Seraph's Landing, consumed it, transformed it. The Imperium burned what remained, scattered the survivors, closed the file. The gardens are gone. The fountains are gone. The jasmine is gone. Cornelius and Matthias and 8 billion others are gone. The planet itself is gone, reduced to a molten sphere orbiting a star in a system now marked as quarantined. Ships are forbidden from approaching. The warp signature is too dangerous, too corrupted. The system will remain quarantined for centuries, perhaps millennia, until the taint fades, until the Imperium forgets why the system was quarantined in the first place. But I remember. I will remember until I die. Then my memory will die with me. And perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps some things should be forgotten. Perhaps carrying the memory of paradise only makes surviving its loss more painful. Perhaps forgetting would be mercy. But I cannot forget. The jasmine at 23 degrees Celsius, the crystal fountains, the birds singing, the children playing, Cornelius noting the atmospheric anomaly, Matthias pulling me toward the gun cutter, the planet burning. These memories are permanent, burned into my consciousness as deeply as the exterminators burned Seraph's Landing. I am marked, scarred, changed. I survived. But survival is not victory. Survival is just continuation, just function, just carrying weight that cannot be put down. This is my testimony. This is what happened when chaos reached a paradise world. This is how brutal the invasion was, how quickly beauty became horror, how thoroughly the Imperium responds to corruption, how little survival means when everything worth surviving for is destroyed. I am 46 years old. I manage resource distribution on an agri-world. I function adequately. I will continue functioning until I die. Then I will be logged as deceased. My position will be filled. My duties will continue. The Imperium will process another worker into my role. The cycle will perpetuate, as it always does, as it must. Seraph's Landing fell. I survived. That is all. That is everything. That is the testimony. The gardens are gone. The jasmine is gone. Paradise is gone. Only memory remains. Only this record. Only the recognition that beauty was temporary and horror was permanent. That is what I learned. That is what I carry. That is what it means to survive when your world falls to chaos and burns. You continue. You function. You remember. And you understand that survival is not triumph. Survival is just the burden of carrying testimony for what was lost. The Emperor protects, they say. He did not protect Seraph's Landing. He did not protect 8 billion souls. He did not prevent the corruption. He did not stop the fall. He ordered the fire, the exterminators, the annihilation. Perhaps that is protection, destroying what chaos corrupts before corruption spreads. Perhaps that is all the protection the Imperium can offer, not salvation, just containment, not rescue, just termination. I accept this. I have no alternative. I survive in the Imperium the Emperor built, the Imperium that processes worlds into ash when they fall, that scatters survivors and forgets them, that values function over feeling, that requires testimony but does not acknowledge it. I exist within this system. I function within this system. That is all I can do. That is all any of us can do. The jasmine smelled sweet at 23 degrees Celsius. I remember. I will always remember. That is my burden. That is my testament. That is what remains when paradise burns and survivors scatter and the Imperium continues grinding forward. Memory. Testimony. The recognition that everything beautiful is temporary and everything horrible is permanent, and survival is just the space between. This is what it means when chaos reaches a paradise world. This is how brutal the invasion is. This is what the Imperium does in response. This is what survives. Not people, not places, not beauty. Just memory. Just testimony. Just the record that something existed once. Something beautiful. Something lost. Something that will never exist again. I document this. I complete the record. I testify. Then I return to function. Because function is all that remains. Function is all the Imperium requires. Function is all I have. The gardens are gone. The testimony remains. That is enough. That must be enough. That is all there is.